Hi. So I know for some people there's a big question about organic and GMO, genetically mutated or modified organisms. And this is a big topic. It has produced an awful lot of attention. That's not why I'm doing it, though. I'm doing it because I want to try and clear up a few misconceptions. Okay, so first of all, the meaning of organic means that it's something that is um, alive or was alive. It's made from thus it's made from organic material. So I'm organic. This microphone is not organic. My water and the glass and the cover are inorganic. This bag is inorganic. The chips inside are organic because they're made from corn and maybe some inorganic products or ingredients. But that term has been appropriated for the purpose of labeling food to indicate whether the food ingredients were exposed to pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, basically poisons that either were made by humans or come from natural sources. And the assumption that some people make is that all organic or natural poisons are safer or better than for us than a man-made poison. Unfortunately, this is not true. I mean, if we look at the example of the deadly belladonna, which is in the nightshade family, which is another term for that plant, and we find that it is extremely potent, extremely dangerous, and that comes from a natural source. There's also cyanide, which comes from a natural source. You can get it in almonds, you can get it in cherry pits, sweet almonds anyways. The other kind of almond doesn't really have much of any. And there's ricin or ricin, I forget how to pronounce it correctly, and that comes from a natural source. And there are so many other things. Now, this does extend beyond the realm of poisons. You can talk about, say, for example, aspirin. Aspirin originally came from willow bark, willow trees. And in the old days, the Native Americans, who are the ones that shared with us invaders about the efficacy of willow bark to treat certain conditions, and we eventually extracted from the willow bark that aspirin, which is good because if you actually consume willow bark with the same intent as if you consume aspirin, like to relieve a headache or something like that, there are side effects that come with consuming willow bark that you won't get from aspirin. Now, if you consume aspirin as a child, you put yourself at risk of Down syndrome or Ray's syndrome. I forget which one it is, but one of those. But if you consume willow bark, you're going to possibly have to deal with things like vomiting or diarrhea or other problems. So in this case, the man-made version of aspirin is actually much better for us than the unreformulated or unrefined willow bark is. And on the other end of the spectrum, we can talk again about the nightshade family, which includes things like peppers and tomatoes and potatoes and a bunch of other stuff, eggplant. And there was a belief after these things were discovered in the old world, like, for example, potatoes come from South America, that these foods were dangerous in that the skin, which contains lectins, would be fatal if consumed. So that resulted with the potatoes and so on and so forth, that you would peel them. But you can't really do that with a tomato. It's a big mess. So what they did was they would cook the tomatoes in such a way that the skin would separate from the flesh underneath. I mean, the tomato flesh, not people flesh or not animal flesh. And that would make it easy to remove that skin and consume the rest of the tomato without having to worry about any pesky lectins. And lectins are there to dissuade animals from eating that particular produce, I guess it would be an easy way to explain it. Unfortunately, in the modern era, there are doctors who have latched on to this whole lectin thing and have come to decide that everybody should avoid lectin-containing produce, which lectin is in a lot of things. Fortunately for us, we have the ability to cook food, and heat destroys much, if not all, of the lectin in tomatoes, eggplants, potatoes, peppers, and so on. So we don't actually have to worry about it. Now, there is a subset of people, a small group of people who, that's my son crawling by, and he has reminded me that it's Ray's syndrome that can be caused by children consuming aspirin. Okay, so these people like Dr. Gundry and certain other people have latched onto the idea that because there is a subset of people for whom consuming produce with lectin in it find relief if they stop consuming those products or those fruits and vegetables and stuff, that everybody should. And yet we have huge numbers of people who consume these things on a daily basis and do not suffer unless they choose to eat them the wrong way. Now, here's the problem I have. If we talk about things like beans, a lot of beans have dangerous lectins in them. And if you don't cook those beans, you eat them raw, it can be quite dangerous for you, unless you eat just a very small amount. Now, before I learned about this, I had actually, for reviews, I had eaten raw green beans, not understanding that raw green beans should not be consumed raw, because they contain a blood clotting agent lectin in them that, if you consume enough, will clot all your blood and you'll die. Yay. So these people have latched on to the idea of telling everybody, don't eat anything with lectins. And that's a really long list of fruits and vegetables. And some of them are complaining plants are trying to kill you. And these, at best, these people have good intentions and are misguided in their understanding of science and the unequal impact that things have on people. So for some people who have extreme sensitivities, they may need to avoid these things or eliminate them from the diet and then slowly, in small increments, reintroduce them into their diet. But hold on a second here. The topic of this video is organic and GMO. And so I think I've pretty well explained why it is that organic isn't necessarily better. So we, as the scientists, the chemists, and so on that make these man-made or human-made, I should say, products, the poisons and fertilizers and all that kind of stuff, can potentially, not always, can potentially sometimes make something that is better than what nature can provide us with. The mistake that a lot of us make when it comes to organic is we assume that organic also means there are no pesticides, which is not at all true. Now, if I remember correctly, at one point early on with organic, USDA organic, it meant it had different levels, and one of the levels indicated that there were no poisons used. But I think they abandoned that approach and just went with USDA organic. That was a lot easier. And then they added in GMO as part of the package, or non-GMO, I should say. These days, there's organic, and there's USDA organic, and USDA organic guarantees that the product doesn't contain any genetically modified ingredients. So, is organic better? It depends. It depends on what poisons have been used, whether these are, and I'm going to speculate here a little bit, but it depends on whether it is on the surface only, or if it is a systemic poison, which is going to cause potentially cause fundamental changes within the plant that could be bad for us because it's inside of what we're eating, not just on the surface. So you can't wash it off. Now, you may be able to destroy it through the process of cooking. In which case, you could say, well, I guess I have to cook everything, which that may be true. Some foods are better raw, but if you're uncertain and you know that, or you know that there's a poison involved, it's safer to cook because cooking can neutralize a lot of things. And not all poisons will be neutralized by heat, but some of them will. So we think when we hear organic, USDA organic, that, oh, this is safe for me. I don't have to wash it. And the poisons that the farmers used, because they're natural, it's safe for us to consume. No, and no. Number one, you must still wash organic produce unless on the packaging it indicates that they've already been washed, which is usually like if you buy lettuce that's in a package, where they've removed it from the stem, then that would be pre-washed usually, and so on and so forth. But generally speaking, if you're buying whole produce, you must wash it to remove the poison. Man-made or not, it doesn't matter. Lots of poisons are bad for us. You get Botox, that's in a very small measured dose and can produce beneficial results. You get that stuff, that toxin in a large enough quantity, you will be dead. And that's a natural toxin. Okay? So do not assume that organic means no poisons that are dangerous to your health. Do not assume that because it's organic that the poisons that were used are safe. Do not just... So, should you buy USDA organic? If you're interested in non-GMO, then yes. But otherwise, especially if buying organic is USDA organic products is something that is too expensive for you, no. But in general, you don't need to buy organic. Now, there are some pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, and other poisons, and even fertilizers that will produce nutritionally inferior produce. So if you take two different brands and you notice one tastes better than the other and they're the same level of ripeness or whatever, then there's a good chance that brand that doesn't taste as good, but if it's non-GMO, assuming, right, tastes better because they used a poison and or fertilizers that don't alter the nutritional profile, do not alter the flavor, because some of these man-made and even natural chemicals will alter the nutritional profile. Taking a very extreme example here, if you feed fish man-made pellets and flakes and stuff like that, and then you cook it and eat it, it's going to have a different flavor than a fish that was raised on its natural diet. it will also tend to rot faster. And oftentimes, in my experience in eating farm-raised fish, especially when I was in Indonesia, but also here in America, you will notice that the flesh of the fish, unless it has been fried, has a kind of muddy flavor. And I mean, literally, it tastes kind of like mud would, like if you've never tasted dirt or mud, it has that smell. It has that taste as well. And that's because the nutritional profile of the man-made feed for the fish is inferior to their natural diet. And therefore, the meat rots faster, the blood is thinner, the fish are more prone to getting ill, which is why they have to dump antibiotics in the water, which is why we have so many problems with part of the reason why we have so many problems with antibiotic-resistant bacteria, and so on and so forth. So if you taste two different brands and you taste a brand and you're like, oh, this doesn't taste good, like carrots. Carrots are one of the ones where I have noticed a huge difference in flavor. And the carrots that have been treated with certain types of fertilizers and poisons have a very off-putting flavor when they're not cooked. And sometimes even when they are cooked. So if you notice that, don't buy that brand. Tell your grocery store, this brand does not taste good. Please, let's get something better. And you don't have to explain to them. They can they can say, well, okay, customers are complaining about it, so we should probably stop buying this brand. And yeah. And this is not always the reason why something doesn't taste good. Like Brussels sprouts. Brussels sprouts some of them taste really nice. Some of them don't taste nice. Apparently, the ones that are genetically modified are the ones that are at least some of the ones that actually taste good. I've had some Brussels sprouts where they tasted amazing that came out of a bag. I've had some that were horrible. I've had them off the stem, and those were amazing tasting. It was the Ocean Mist brand. But yeah, there are other factors involved. It's not all about these chemicals, okay? But yeah, if you taste something and you notice that the profile of the flavor seems to be unpleasant, it may be because of these man-made or even organic chemicals. So moving on to non-GMO. Is it important to eat non-GMO? Okay, now if we talk about what non-GMO means, very clearly it's a bit muddy because we have been genetically modifying plants and animals for hundreds and in some cases thousands or even tens of thousands of years. Like if you look at cats and dogs, they have been part of our lives for many, many thousands of years, going back into prehistory. So those animals are not the same as wild wolves or dingoes or the animals, the wild dogs of Australia, and so on and so forth. Because they have been domesticated, they now want to eat a certain amount of carbs, whereas wild animals tend to, the truly wild, not the ones that have the domesticated cats and dogs that are living out in the wild and have become feral, those will potentially still eat carbs. But the truly wild, original species like the wolves and the dingoes and stuff will avoid eating carbs. So it's really a very unclear term because we have been accidentally and deliberately doing this for so long. Like Wagyu beef comes from cows that have been genetically modified to produce more fat in their meat. Now, Wagyu may be very soft and tasty. However, that high fat concentration makes it worse for health than regular beef that has been raised on corn, which is worse for health than regular cow meat that has been raised on grass and straw and hay. So it's It's a complicated thing. But let's boil it down to this. If you are concerned, number one, about eating things that have been genetically modified directly on the genetic level through scientific procedures in a, I guess you could say, short-term method, not generations of interbreeding to produce specific results, but things you can do in a lab where you're splicing genes and stuff like that, then that is something that is probably wise to be concerned about, especially when we talk about companies like Monsanto, which is now Bayer, because they have a long track record, along with Dow and several other companies, of not being honest with the public about the possible consequences, and also with paying off politicians so that they are exempt from consequences for themselves. And yet we suffer the consequences again and again and again. So in my mind, I think non-GMO, and I'm looking at this from a not super informed position, but I think I know enough to say this is more important than organic. If organic meant no pesticides, no man-made fertilizers, all natural stuff that is what the plant or animal actually needs, then that would be great. But it doesn't mean that. So necessarily, it doesn't mean it. I mean, if it's not USDA organic, it may mean something different. But in general, that it's about natural versus human-made. But non-GMO is in reference to things that have been genetically spliced, genetically altered in a lab to produce a different variety. So like Monsanto produces glyphosate, which is Roundup, and they produced plants that give us produce that are immune to glyphosate. And then they lied and said that no, the pollen from these are not going to mix with the existing natural farmland to result in strains that have this genetic mutation in them, which was a big lie, because of course the bees are not going to say, oh gosh, this is GMO pollen, I can't go over there to that non-GMO farm. They're going to go over there. All the animals that are transferring pollen are not going to be discriminating between GMO and non-GMO. So unfortunately, that has actually destroyed some farms because, well, that's another story. You can look it up. Anyways, I would say if you can afford non-GMO, get it. Especially if it tastes better. But also keep in mind that sometimes non-GMO means it's not going to taste as good because it's closer to the original. And original, if you look at original bananas, they have very little meat in them and big seeds. Now, in Indonesia, I've eaten some varieties where it was kind of a mix. The seeds were about maybe about the size of a small pea, and they're very hard, so you can't just chew them up. And there is a fair amount of flesh in there, and they do taste good. So I haven't actually had the original or OG banana, but I've had an interim variety where the seeds are still large and hard. And if you look at in America, there aren't very many varieties available. In most places, there's only one variety. That's the Cavendish. They are long, not the longest type of banana, but they're long. They're very soft. If you see anything, you'll see this very, it's almost just like a brown little series of lines in that are like that long in the banana flesh near the center, and those are the vestigial remains of seeds. And there are other brands, or other not brands, but species There's pink ones, and there are tiny ones that are like this long, and there are really, really fat ones, and there are really long ones, and there are all kinds of different styles. Some of them are not even edible. Some of them are just decorative. But yeah, so the new ones, the GMO ones, whether they are through a process of crossbreeding and stuff like that over generations, or if they're genetically modified in a lab, actually have tastier flesh and than the ones that have not been modified much. So it's I guess it's, ultimately it's up to you. But if you notice you're having problems after you consume a specific species or brand, then you should probably do some verification that is actually what's causing the problem and it's not something else. Because sometimes you have two different things at the same time. You think it's one, it turns out to be the other one. Or it could be something totally unrelated to either of them. Or just completely avoid it and see if the problem goes away, and then reintroduce it if the problem comes back. So, yeah. I hope in this overly long video you now have a better understanding of both GMO and organic and how important it is. If you are on a tight budget, don't worry about organic or GMO. If you can't afford it, and I know in some areas people do not have access to fresh produce, which I think is in a country like America is criminal. It shouldn't even be possible that people can't have access to fresh produce, and or that it's cheaper to buy junk food because it's subsidized by the government than it is to buy fresh produce, which is definitely vastly better for your health. If you are worried about lectins and other things in the skin of a product, either peel it or cook it. If you cook it, you don't need to peel it. You can eat potato peels. You can eat tomato peels. I mean, I've been eating raw tomatoes, well, not all my life, but a good portion of my life, more than half of my life, after I learned to like raw tomatoes. I didn't used to. As a kid, I wouldn't eat raw tomatoes. I'd only eat cooked ones. Same with carrots. But anyways, if you're concerned, if you have learned through experimentation, through an elimination diet like FODMAP or whatever, that certain things are a problem for you, eliminate them from your diet or cook them and see if that helps. And then very, very slowly in little increments, reintroduce them. If you have any questions, please put them in the comments. If you have any feedback, remember my rules: be civil, be intelligent, be logical, and I will be happy to respond. If you're going to be rude, don't even bother. I'm just so done with that. All right. Thanks for watching, and I hope you have a great day.